Yes. So, hello, 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 and
So,
welcome to the Cynic's Guide to Hippie Shit. So, I'm here today with Shirley Farnham, and we are going to be talking about rhythmic movement. So, we had a chat the other week, didn't we, about
good.
the work that you're doing, some new training that you've been doing, and we started talking about this rhythmic movement. What is it?
And where does it come from?
Yes.
Rhythmic movement is a way of addressing um, issues like attention, emotion regulation, higher level kind of learning difficulties that people may be having. Um, Let me start right at the beginning and say that the way I came to it was because I've worked with ADHD and autistic children and their parents. I'm also a private tutor, so I tutor maths and English. And I always knew, and the more I've learned, the more I realized there were things going on beneath that struggle with maths and English. So that really was my entry point. I knew that by helping somebody to understand more maths and more English and work on the basic skills, there's definitely value in that. But there were still barriers that we were hitting. And I knew there had to be something more to it. So I've gone on a journey of learning. I've come to understand more about sound processing and the absolute importance as a foundational skill of that. But even beneath that comes these the movements in our body and the ability of our body to work in certain ways really forms the foundation for our cognitive skills and our social skills and our emotional skills. Everything kind of rests on that ability for the body to develop certain connections with the brain, to be able to work in certain ways. And that was really the initial kind of starting point for me. I then learned more about primitive reflexes. Do you want me to say something more about those now, or?
Yeah, I mean the only primitive reflex well, as soon as you said that, well, okay, there's two that I can think of. Is that like the grip, like when a
Yes,
baby grips your hand,
absolutely.
and the startle reflex?
Yes,
My
yes.
little one, I remember like when she was a week old, and she'd be lying in my arms, and she'd just go,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
she did it a
exactly that.
lot. It was really creepy.
Yeah, yeah. It's and those are really important for a baby to have. You know, those reflexes, which means that they're not conscious controlled movements. They are in response to some kind of touch or some kind of sound, some kind of sensory input, something that goes on around them and their body reacts to it. And those are really, really vital for a baby to have to protect themselves, to learn and grow and develop in certain ways. Those reflexive movements help them develop the movements where they control their own body and they can think about moving their arm and sitting up and crawling and walking and all of those kind of things. Without those reflexive movements, all of that wouldn't happen. The difficulty comes in when those reflexive movements are then not integrated, so they don't disappear naturally. The central nervous system continues to use those movements, and that hinders the development of other movement and other higher level skills.
So is this if the child has not been able to express those movements? So I'm just thinking, remember when babies used to be swaddled? Is
Yes,
that a
yeah.
good thing or a bad thing in this?
Yeah, now that is absolutely, it can be that their movement is restricted when they are little. It can be that their brain at that point in time is just not able or ready to kind of integrate that movement. There can be a variety of reasons. I'm always really conscious to say, to parents whose children still have retained primitive reflexes, or even if adults have retained primitive reflexes, nobody did anything wrong. There's no judgment here on you shouldn't have done that or you should have done that. Those kind of things are really unhelpful. Just when the movement was required for some reason, that baby's central nervous system wasn't able to integrate that reflex. And so it persists and it lingers in the body. and it can cause a lot of difficulty for young children as they're developing, and then even more as we grow to be adults. And there's many adults who still have retained primitive reflexes. I mean, I went to do my training for it, and the trainer was demonstrating on different people, and she kept kind of saying, oh, you better do that movement because you need to integrate that primitive reflex.
What with the
And I,
adult who were
yeah,
doing the training with you?
absolutely. Yeah, in the adults. And it starts all the way, that we have two fear reflexes. So we have the fear paralysis reflex, which begins in the womb, and that is the reflex that makes the baby freeze. And we still have that when we come out, when we're born. So if we are touched in a certain way, our whole body will freeze. And that is a necessary kind of reflex to protect us from danger. But if that reflex is continuing and it's not properly integrated, you can absolutely see how that's going to cause difficulty. What you were talking about with your daughter with the startle reflex, that's something called the Morrow reflex. And again, it makes the baby kind of opens itself up and then it kind of goes in, doesn't it? It startles and then it goes in and it clings. So there's two stages to that reflex. And it's very normal for babies to do that. What's really important is when they are startled and then they want to cling, that they have the ability then to do that with a safe person. So that's when we rock them and we kind of cuddle them and we give them that reassurance, and all of that helps that Morrow reflex to integrate. I still have a retained Morrow reflex, hence anxiety, never feeling maybe 100% safe in certain environments. If people are behind me or loud noises are going to happen or things are unpredictable, that causes that anxiety. Needless to say, I'm doing the exercises now to integrate that reflex. But everything kind of then develops on top of that Morrow reflex. And if that is not yet integrated, it can cause persistent problems throughout the rest of your childhood and into adulthood.
So as an adult, it wouldn't be that an adult will be walking down the street randomly go, "Ugh," and
No,
it would be
exactly.
more something that they would, how would it manifest, or how did it manifest for you?
So the Morrow reflex develops into the autonomic nervous system state, so that fight, flight, and fear. Sorry, the fight, flight, and freeze is what I meant to say. All of it based on fear or safety. And if that Morrow reflex is not well integrated, those states and the ability of our nervous system to move easily into the fight state when we need to, when somebody attacks us from the back and we need to have that fight reflex, the ability to move into the flight reflex, so running away when something is dangerous, but being able to come back to regulation. We don't ever want to think of our nervous system as we can't have those
Yeah.
responses. We need those responses, but we need to be able to come back to regulation afterwards. And when the Morrow reflex is not integrated, when your nervous system hasn't developed that ability, then you're much more likely to get stuck in those responses. And those become your kind of default state rather than having a state of regulation and rest and digest and being able to be social and all of those things.
So your ideal is you have a response to danger, and
Yes,
then the danger passes and you go back to,
back to regulation. Yeah,
whereas if you haven't integrated the moral reflex,
yeah,
you're essentially what you might describe as being up a height.
yes, exactly,
Um,
exactly.
and there isn't an obvious reason for it.
Yes.
It's just this feeling. That's really interesting. I
Yeah.
see that in
The
so
way,
many people a lot of the time.
yeah, the way that your brain registers fear is not as a real fear. There's a lot of perceived fears, and obviously there's much more at play than just that reflex. There's so many more things, the predictions that your brain makes, but that is absolutely one of the reasons why you may not be able to regulate very easy, and you may live in that constant state of stress or shutdown. one of the two. So it's just so fascinating that it all goes back to those really, really early movements. Another good example of one is something called the asymmetric tonic neck reflex. So we have reflexes in our neck that mean that our head and our body can move separately. So, when if a baby moves its head to one side, you'll often see its arm extending and the other arm kind of curling in. So move the head, arm like that. And that is a reflex that the baby has. This is helping the baby to learn to roll over and then to sit up and then to crawl. All of that's part of the development. So it's a good thing that the baby has it.
Yeah.
If that reflex is not integrated, when an adult turns their head and their arm wants to go out and their other arm wants to come across, you could imagine that when they're trying to drive and they look to the side to check that there's not a car and their arm moves, the steering wheel moves at the same time.
That's
So,
why I failed my last test.
okay.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah,
So my last driving test, I was 40 minutes into the test,
yeah,
on my way back to the test center, and
yeah,
there's a lorry to my left, and I wanted to overtake it. So I was looking,
yeah,
and as I was looking,
yeah. You
the
would,
examiner took the wheel. So
yeah,
my interpretation, partly of what was happening, is I should have been looking ahead of the lorry, not at the lorry. So
yeah,
I was looking at where I didn't want to go rather than where I wanted to
yeah,
go.
yeah.
But could there also be some sort of reflex
Yeah,
going on there?
absolutely, absolutely. If you think of, you think of a child riding a bike, exactly the same thing. They look to the side and the whole bike swerves and they fall off their bike. Or if they're trying to do their handwriting, let's say you've got a child trying to write, and because their head is looking in a certain direction, their arm moves, makes it really difficult to write. So there's so many things that we then might go, oh, this child is reluctant to write. This child can't manage to keep their pen on the page. There's so many kind of things that we then draw from that, whereas right at the root of it is this reflex that's not integrated, which is just making it impossible for their body to work in the way that helps them in that moment.
So what kind of things can cause this? I mean, I'm thinking about like babies who have been in hospital, like in incubators and things like that, and have not necessarily been able to be cuddled, for instance. Could that cause this kind of thing?
Absolutely. If you go all the way back to a pregnant woman, if you have a mom, an expectant mom who is really ill and she doesn't move a lot, so she's maybe told to do bed rest, or every time she sits up, she feels ill, so she lies down a lot of the time, she is not moving a lot, which means the baby's not moving or not getting that passive movement, because obviously in the womb, a lot of it is passive. They're not getting a lot of that passive movement. So that can be a contributing factor. If a baby is not born naturally, if there's a C-section, that can be a contributing factor, because the way that the baby moves down the birth canal, some of those reflexes are integrated as that happens. So they miss
Okay.
out on that kind of thing. Again, exactly like you said, if a baby's born prematurely and they're in an incubator and they're kind of contained, or swaddling, I see the good and bad of swaddling, because swaddling for some babies is really reassuring, really comforting, but you're not allowing their arms and legs to move. So maybe a tiny baby for that comfort, but certainly once a baby's able to move and feels more secure in the world, that movement is important. And what do we do these days? We put our babies in chairs and rockers and swings and all sorts of containers that mean that their natural movements don't happen. So they don't do that startle reflex or that kind of movement with their body. They don't learn about their body, and their brain and body then don't make those connections. So really what they're saying now is that putting your baby on a hard floor, obviously a cushion or a blanket or something, make it comfortable, but literally just put it on the floor and let it use its body to develop those movement patterns. And not only on its back, very much on
Tummy
its
time.
as
Yeah.
well. Yeah, really important for a baby to have that opportunity to lift its neck up, even though it looks awkward, even although maybe when it comes down, it hits its head on the floor. Obviously, we don't want any harm to the baby, but it's really important that it goes through those movements in
Mm,
order for its body and its brain to make those connections, to learn from experience, and then to be able to integrate those reflexes. And
that's
then older children, they need to slide and swing and jump and climb and roll and do handstands and all of those things, which unfortunately in the world as it is today, with technology, and I hate to always bring it back to that because, I don't want to say, oh, technology is the cause of that. It absolutely is, and it has lots of benefits. But the fact that our children are in buggies and they're looking at a screen, or they're in the house and they're looking at a screen, there's nothing wrong with that as long as there's lots of other movement happening as well. Because without that movement, that free movement, these reflexes will not develop as they should. And we're looking at the reflexes to be developed within the first few years, but really all of that movement up until the age of 7 is critical. So if you think up until the age of 7 really is when our children have better sound processing, better vision control, their sensory motor skills are integrated. They need those 7 years to do that. And what do we do with them when they're 4? We put them in a school and make them sit in a chair and table, and try to do handwriting. They don't yet have those motor skills to be able to do that kind of thing. So immediately we're having expectations long before their bodies and their brains are ready for it to be able to start learning phonics and doing handwriting and copying from a board and sitting still for an hour. It's just not, it's developmentally, it's not correct for those children.